In this video, I'm going to be going over the Grafana LGTM stack using Docker Compose. So you'll be able to deploy the exact same environment that I'm showing you right here. It comes with an API, Prometheus, and Grafana with OpenTelemetry via Tempo and log analysis with Loki. Okay, so that's the LGTM stack. On the right panel in this dashboard, we have a query here, which is telling you your endpoints that are experiencing latency. So I can see that 25% of the requests were faster than that for that endpoint. So if I go back to my panel here, my dashboard, on the left, this is actually a OpenTelemetry metric from Tempo. And what it's doing the same thing basically with a different variable amount, different seconds amount, but it's doing it for the spans. So looking at this dashboard, I can kind of guess here, or not guess, but go, okay, this endpoint is taking a long time, and this is a span that is associated to that endpoint. I also have it configured to have a data link, so I can click on that line and go link to span, and it opens up all of the spans that are associated to that, all the traces that are associated to that span. So if I click on one of these traces here, then it'll open up a query with a node graph so you can see all the different areas that your query, that your trace went to. So these are all the different spans that your trace went to, right? So a trace is your entire request and a span is a piece of your request. If I scroll down, you can see that OpenTelemetry is able to tell you a lot of details about your request, such as the queries and how long the queries or each part of your request took to run, really. So you can see to connect to the database, it took this long. To run the select query, it took this long, and so on and so on. And what's really cool about this is you can actually open up the query and see it. So you should be able to see the query. There it is. Okay. And then there's also a nice little service graph view area over here. It gives you an idea of your entire traces. Okay, so we can close out of this here. And I will get you familiar with the application that we're running. Here's the code for it. The repo is open, so you can go and have a look at it. And I'll share all the links that are relevant to it. And it's also already packaged up on Docker Hub, so you don't have to worry about it. This is what the application looks like. So basically, you just get a quote from the Coinbase API. If you mess up, get an error. And then you can save a quote into your database. And you can read from the database. I think the whole idea is to be able to compare latency between reading from the database and reading from the Coinbase API. So you can go back to here and you can see if we go to our dashboard here, this would be getting it from the Coinbase API, bad latency. And it's a little small here. I'm just trying to find the one from reading from the database. There it is, good latency. And then you can click into it and link to span, and then it'll automatically build the trace QL query for you in the Explore tab. And then you can click on the trace here and scroll down and you can see what parts took the most amount of time. You can look at your query. So you get pretty detailed into it. You can also look at the logs. I don't have the logs configured to output the trace ID, or the span ID, so it won't have that information in there right now. But either way, you can look at all of your different spans and the latency that was taken at each one. So you can see the percentage of time that was taken there. So it's really cool, and you can play around with the dashboard a little bit. So if I go to the dashboard, I could even type the word error and hit enter, and all of the logs with the word error will show up. I could type in ETH, and all of the logs for the ETH show up. So it's got some nice features built into it. Now, how about deploying this, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to deploy it. So let's go to my home directory, and I'm just going to delete the one that I have right now so I can run it from scratch. I'm running this on an EC2 instance. You don't have to run it on an EC2 instance. If you use Docker Desktop, it should already come with Docker Compose. Now, this is the repository that has the Docker Compose app in it. So if you click on this Docker Compose file, you'll see that we're deploying Grafana, Prometheus, Loki, Prometheus. That'll scrape the logs for Loki. And then Tempo. Tempo is the OpenTelemetry database. That's what's going to store the traces and spans. And then this is a MySQL server for our app. And this is the app. So it's got all the dashboards and the configs files in it already. So if you clone this repo, it has everything you need. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and really quick show you some settings you're going to need in AWS. If you're using AWS, you don't have to use an EC2 instance, but if you do, then these are the ports that you're going to want to have open to be able to access the different applications. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to here, and I will clone this repo. And then CD into it. Now you're going to have Docker installed. So to install Docker, sudo dnf install docker -y. Okay, I've already got mine installed. And then you're also going to have to install Docker Compose. Again, Docker Desktop will already come with Docker Compose, but if you're on an EC2 instance or some other Linux machine, you might not have it installed. You can go to the Docker Compose site, GitHub, and look for their releases under assets. The one you're going to need is this one for most Linux versions, right? Unless you're running a different architecture. So let's go ahead and just copy the link, go here, run curl -l, and then we're going to save that to user local bin, because user local bin is in our path, so it'll be able to execute from anywhere. Docker Compose. That's what we'll save it as. Okay. I've probably got let's see, I think you need sudo in front of it, that's all. My terminal, my screen's a little messed up, it needs a refresh. Okay. So that should be fine. We should be able to run chmod +x sudo user local bin Docker compose, and now run Docker compose version. There we go. So that is how you'll be installing Docker compose on Linux if you're on Linux. So after we've installed Docker, you have to add yourself to the Docker group as well. So you might just want to run sudo user mod add group, name of the group, and then the username. So you could use that environment variable for your own username. Okay, and then after you do that, you have to log out and log back in, or you could just log in again. Here's a little trick to log in again. Before I do that, I'll just run history minus A so that my history will be there. Sudo su user. Okay, now I'm logged in again. If I go ahead and enable Docker, sudo systemctl enable Docker. That way, if I ever log out and log back in, or I'm sorry, restart my machine, then Docker will systemd will automatically start Docker. And if I start it right now, that should be fine. And then we can look at the status to verify that all of that worked. So it looks like it did. I already have this stuff running, so it's all there. And it's enabled, so that means if your Linux machine ever turns off and on, it'll turn it back on. It's running right now, and here are the logs and associated services. So that should be good. Okay. I'm going to cd into the repository I cloned earlier, and I'm just going to go ahead and run docker compose down to turn everything off. I'm getting some warnings for environment variables. If I go back to here in the README, it gives you a template for the env file. So I'll just do vi.env, paste these in there. Okay. So that's the only thing I had to do is I had to make this env file. Pretty simple. You could just copy it from here. That's fine. Now I can run docker compose up -d to run it in the background daemon mode. Another thing I'll mention is my EC2 instance is a t2.medium, and I gave myself a little bit more memory too. So I think I put 30 gigs in there. Let's see, 30 gigs. Okay, and it'll take a little bit to run, to get running. Now, once it's all up and running, then you should be able to, if you're on an EC2 instance, use your public IP. If you're running it locally, use localhost. And the port for the API is going to be 8080. Okay, 8080. The port for Prometheus is going to be 9090. And one thing that you could do in Prometheus, you can write queries in here. You can also view your target health. So you can tell that it's getting metrics from FastAPI and it's getting metrics from Tempo right now. That's great. Although I wouldn't really query in here because you're probably going to have a better time doing that in Grafana itself under the Explore tab, right? So I could just, and the default password is going to be admin, admin. And the port for Grafana is 3000, right? So it's going to be localhost 3000. Okay, so if I go to Explore, I can toggle between Loki, Prometheus. I really like this metric browser in here. So I could just type in things and find metrics. You can also go back to here and click into these endpoints. You might have to use your IP address or localhost though, and you'll get a nice view of that. So like if I were to go here, for example, I could go to this endpoint, hit try it out, execute, and then I can see that these are all the metrics I have. Okay, so you could also type that in the browser, right? Okay, if I go back to Grafana, you can see that my dashboard is there. And I don't have much data because I just turned the app off and on, and I wasn't using a volume. I didn't really think it's important to have a volume for this demonstration here. You can add that if you like. So if I want to get a quote, again, I can go BTC. This is going to connect to the Coinbase API. There's my quote. If I want to get another one, ETH, XRP. Okay, I can run this post request, which will save it into the database. So it's going to read from Coinbase and then perform a write operation on that into my database. There we go. And I'll be posting all of the relevant links to this, so don't worry about it. If I want to go QQQ, BTC. There we go. This one read from the database. So you see it's a read from the database. This is a read from the API. So then I can go back to here. I can hit refresh. And I can see my different latencies for the different requests. I can click into a trace. Look at the query that was ran. This was run during the application start. Okay, I can go look for another one. Let's look for something a little slower. There we go. So during this trace, we can look at the node graph. We can see everything that it's done. So here's the request. Made a GET request. Connected to a database. Performed a select. Performed an insert. And then I think this is the response. These two are building up the response and then sending it. And you can also look at them down here, each individual part. So you can see how long the select query took. This is the GET request. This was the actual request to Coinbase, right? So if I'm looking at all these spans right here, I can really easily see that the GET request to Coinbase took the longest out of all of them. What I really think is cool is that you can actually see how long the SQL queries took and open them up and view the queries too. So I think that gives you great insight. And to do that, you have to use OpenTelemetry packages with whatever SQL driver you're using. So I'm using SQL Alchemy, ORM, and they have OpenTelemetry instrumentator right here. Okay, and then here's the source code for that. Again, you can have a look at this source code. You can clone this repository. It's not needed though because the image is already in Docker Hub, so you don't need to clone this repository. You can have a look at it. The repository that you need to clone is right here. This repository contains the Docker Compose file, which will build the whole app that you just saw, the stack, right? Which is including Grafana, Prometheus, the API, MySQL, LGTM, all of that. So I hope you enjoyed that little demonstration there and that you find the Docker Compose file useful. And if you have any trouble deploying it, let me know and I'm happy to help. So thanks for watching.